Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Subchakchai Bankard, and I'm here with some bike riders and fall guys. First, he sees the TV glow. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
How do I need what's an inbox? I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. And his love lies bleeding. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Wait. I need a quote. Yeah, that will do. I'm good, Jen. How are you?
What is happening? I'm great. Thank you. And last but not least, his favorite day of the week is Tuesday. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you, Antonio?
I don't know what I am without you. I don't know what the world is without you in it, Jen, PT, and Greg.
I'm doing great. So, listeners, those were all references to films that have come out in 2024. So we are here today to do a mid-year check-in of sorts and give some shout-outs to films that we've enjoyed from this year so far. So we're actually giving our top 3 most overlooked films of the year. So the rule that we kind of arbitrarily set for ourselves was to pick 3 films that we really enjoyed this year so far, but we are not allowed to choose a film that we have reviewed on this show. A lot of films that came out in theaters earlier this year are now on home video or streaming. So we thought it'd be a really good time to kind of give those kinds of recommendations if you're looking for something to watch that maybe you didn't know about. We also just kind of didn't want to say Dune Part 2 and Furiosa a bunch of times because if left to our own devices, that's probably what this episode would have devolved into. And, since we're focusing on films that we think folks haven't seen yet, we are going to try to make the whole episode spoiler free. Obviously, if there's an emergency situation, an ad hoc spoiler can be issued, but we're going to try our best to avoid that. PT, if listeners think we're the best podcasters of the year so far after listening to this episode, see, that was so implausible, I couldn't really say it. But anyway, regardless, what could they do?
After they're done checking the calendar to see what year it is that these movies came out on home video, if they want to check new episodes of the episode when they drop, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening right now. We host the feed on Jen's Substack, and I already feel bad for the joke about the home video thing. It's fine. But we host the feed
ready. Finish.
We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us, especially on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps our visibility. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod to get updates over there. Jen?
All right, so here's the thing. I originally wrote VOD, which stands for Video on Demand. But then I realized not a ton of people who aren't movie nerds know what VOD is. Like, I know what VOD is because that's like the parlance of movie podcasts, right? But like, that acronym doesn't immediately tell you what it means, right? So I was trying to be sensitive to our audience and say home video, but then I transported us back to the 90s apparently by doing that. And didn't realize it. Because I have heard people refer to it as home video, meaning they basically mean VOD. Like, they just don't like using the acronym VOD.
I mocked it, but I love it, and I think we should bring it back. I think that is what we should use for it.
Right. Because video doesn't mean VHS anymore, right? Yeah. Like, when you say video, it means like streaming a thing streaming digitally.
Video on demand at home is home video, right? Like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're already wasting time.
I know, this is off to a great start. So before we get into our individual picks, I just wanted to kind of, I think PT, when we were kind of trying to brainstorm what we'd do for this episode, use the phrase temperature check. So I just want to do that for all of us for the movie year so far. There was a lot of hand wringing because, we were coming off the strike. We were really worried about especially what the summer was going to look like. There's been a lot of discourse about the industry, but, either in spite of that or in response to that, like, how are you feeling as a moviegoer right now?
For me, honestly, it's not that different a year than normal because normally the first half of the year is not the time of year when I'm watching movies a lot, right? The beginning of a year always starts with sort of like the cast-offs that weren't like worth Oscar buzz, and then weird horror movies with like teddy bears and swimming pools. And then summer blockbuster time is normally not like, there are some things that I want to watch, but it's not normally it's around the fall and then the winter where I'm really like watching movies every week and sometimes more than one a week. So for me, the rhythm is kind of normal. How about you, Greg?
No, I'm a weirdo. I've been at the movies way more this year than is both healthy and previous years. I was just checking my letterbox stats. I'm already at 266 for the year, and that puts me ahead of where I was like last September for 2023. So, and I've been actually maxing out my AMC stubs a lot, right? That lets you see 3 a week, and last week I only went to 1, and that was the first time I'd missed some free movie screenings since late March. So, so I would say I expected this to be a really down year, and I'm actually seeing a lot and enjoying a lot of what I'm seeing. And I think a lot of stuff is not getting what it deserves. Now, that doesn't mean everything has been good. I've seen a lot of crap, but I think a lot of I think the discourse that popped up around Fall Guy was a perfectly fine kind of summer blockbustery movie, and it just kind of fizzled. And Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, nope, Rise of the Kingdom, something with monkeys, it was great, but not the giant monkeys, the little monkeys. It was like great and it was fine, but it's kind of done okay, not great. And then I think we've all talked about Furiosa a lot. So it's been better than I expected it to be. And I would say while the top of the box office may be disappointing, the kind of mid-range has been quietly very solid. And I've seen some great movies that I'm looking forward to talking about tonight. Now, PT, you see more than me, but you like seek out what they're called good movies or like proven classic movies instead of just whatever's most popular. How's your year going?
I won't get into a numbers battle, but I have seen more movies crazily than the high number you already said, but way fewer of current year movies. I haven't seen as many. I've only seen like 30 2024 movies, and looking at my letterbox, some of those are like bad true crime miniseries that get somehow logged on Letterboxd. And if I see them, I'll log it because I'm like, well, I did spend 3.5 hours watching this and the crime was solved and it was dumb. But that's, the old movies are not necessarily good. There's a lot of old Westerns and noirs that get put in there that are mediocre, but they're also under like 80 minutes. And that's why I like them, because it's like, well, it's 11 at night. Maybe I just want to watch like a little short movie. And then I'll go to bed. And then sometimes I watch 2 of those, but whatever. I have felt similar to Greg, having said that I've seen fewer than Greg. I felt that like the main kind of headline movies have not necessarily. Let me rephrase. The top movies that were the ones we were most looking forward to, I think for me, have paid out, and that is the aforementioned Dune Part 2 and also Furiosa. I know we had some disagreements in the group about how successful Furiosa was, but I felt satisfied. Will, like, good. That's good. I'm happy about that. Then there's a bunch of blockbusters that I either have not particularly liked or I haven't seen because it didn't look like they'd be very good. But then a whole bunch of kind of mid-range movies, the kind of movies that we always say don't really exist anymore, both do exist and also are getting more attention because we're in a little bit of a post-strike lull. So I think that's a good thing, even if it would be great to have a few more blockbusters that we liked and set things on fire. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I do feel like the next couple of months, July and August, and maybe it's September, are when we might really hit the grind a little bit, because we've been looking at the calendar and in our group text being like, what are we covering? Like, what are we doing on some of these weeks? Because it looks a little grim, but I think we get to talk about the things that are not grim today and things that we have really liked. Jen, how about you?
So I'm a little bit similar to Antonio because being an Oscar junkie, this is a lull in the season a little bit, right? Because either things haven't come out yet for all of us to watch that are going to potentially be in the Oscars race, or just there's not a lot there's not a lot of reasons for me to go to like seek out a movie and like go out of my way to find it, right? But what that said, I think doing this episode was really great because then I had to really start thinking about, okay, what are movies that for me normally would kind of fall to the wayside but are actually very good, you know what I mean? Because like they maybe aren't getting the Oscar buzz, or that like the timing of the release. Like some of the movies I was like trying to figure out if I should watch where I'm like, oh yeah, I really wanted to watch that, but then like no one talked about it, and it came out in 2023, but then was not in any Oscar contention or something. You know what I mean? Like there's these cracks that movies sometimes fall through that I don't particularly try to seek out. So I think that like thinking about these movies, yes, like I think there's a big difference between no one's watching movies, except for Greg and PT apparently. No one's watching movies. There's a difference between that and there aren't any good movies. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's definitely the former more than the latter. And I feel like if I didn't listen to so many movie podcasts where people every week are like, the box office, this is terrible, doom is here, right? Doomsday, or like when Inside Out comes out, wow, amazing, box office is blowing up, right? And there's this roller coaster that kind of the movie industry discourse has been on, that if I weren't aware of that, I probably would be blissful in terms of like, wow, I saw some great movies so far this year. And also, like, I feel like everyone conveniently forgets that Doom Part 2 was such a big hit critically and at the box office, when they kind of are like doing the panic running around the sky is falling discourse. So yeah, so I'd say that like considering everything and considering how it's primed to be like, we're doomed, the movie year so far has been pretty good. That said, like I'm really chomping at the bit for fall festival season to start, because I know there are a bunch of movies that I'm excited to see that are coming.
I forgot Venice starts in August. Like it's not far.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There was because the bunch of podcasts I follow are already, their news is sort of like TIFF and Telluride and like all of those early fall festivals, and Venice is one of them too. That like apparently they're announcing their lineups, and so people are now reacting to that very excitedly. So yeah. So, but I'm spoiling future episodes, probably future movie news segments. So yeah, let's get into it. So the way we're going to do this, I think, is we're going to kind of go around the circle, and we're going to start with our third pick and then work our way up to the number one, as all good list makers do. Yes, Greg. Point of order.
Point of order. Mini Hollywood news segment. Megalopolis has a distributor. Look out, Hype Draft. We're back. We have a distributor. Lionsgate, thank you so much. Coppola is very excited to work with him. That's all. We don't need to talk about it, but we'll get to the game now. But we can't skip that I actually have a chance now in the Hype Draft because my movie's getting released.
Yes, there was no conspiracy to suppress your excitement about this, I'm sure. Wow, Greg, we are so happy for you. There, I did it. No, really, like I thought it wasn't going to happen. So yeah, I'm glad we actually all get to see this movie, and it's not going to be vaulted away somewhere. Is really the news. I would say, even if it's a train wreck. Okay, so sorry, I had to get it in there. All right, so let's start with Antonio. What is the third pick on your list? And if someone else has it, just quietly say, I have that on my list higher up, and then we will refrain from talking about it.
Got it. So my third movie is one that came out in 2023, but I don't think a lot of people saw it. And it started streaming on Hulu in April, and that movie is Eileen. This is the Anne Hathaway, Thomas McKenzie film. Our friend in the writing program at USC, Corey Nelson, recommended it to me, and I trust her takes. So I watched it on a plane, and I found it really gripping and fascinating from its opening scene on. It's set in a Massachusetts juvenile detention center, and Hathaway plays a therapist who Mackenzie's character, who works at the detention center, becomes infatuated with. And it's just incredible character work. It unfolds really patiently, but it's never boring. It's adapted from a novel, and it feels literary, and that every decision, backstory, every bit of visual and emotional texture feels really deliberate and well planned. It had a little bit of Oscar buzz last year for Anne Hathaway that died out, unfortunately, but I think this is actually my favorite performance of hers, and I like her a lot. And it culminates in this sort of stunning third act that actually just took my breath away on the plane. So this to me is just excellent literary adaptation, on par with like Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Lost Daughter and Sarah Polley's debut, Away From Her, two other really excellent movies. And I'd put this in that category. It's darker than those two, but really, really excellent and shouldn't be missed. So yeah. So now, do I kick it to the next person, or did anyone see this?
I have not seen this, but I've heard the buzz.
Yeah,
like I remember, because this was a Sundance premiere, wasn't it? But an in-person one, like the plebes couldn't see it, like us.
Yes.
So,
and then it was sort of building.
I remember hearing about this.
It was sort of building for a while about like, Eileen, this could be a thing, and then it just kind of didn't happen. But once it hit streaming, folks were like, "Yeah, it's really good. Like, what are we doing? Why weren't we talking about this more?" But Greg, you were raising your hand like you've seen it.
Yeah, I saw it in the theater when it came out. I was one of those weirdos who did see it. And Antonio reviewed it exactly how you need to. But I will just add a tantalizing. There is one scene that is unlike anything you've seen in the theater this year and is absolutely worth the I was going to say the price of admission, but whatever you want to call that. And I actually wondered if there might have been a Best Supporting Actress nomination attached to just this one scene, and it didn't happen. But very, very we're seeing. I might, it gets thrown around a lot, but I might say Hitchcockian for this, because it does kind of unfold that way. And I think this was the third movie last year that Shea Wiggins played a cop in an illustrious career of playing cops, but Shea Wiggins was excellent in it, perhaps even better than he was in Spider-Verse. And for me, that's saying something. So co-sign this recommendation. It's a really great time.
Wow. All right. You had made Hitchcock. I remember being intrigued by this movie, but not like, oh, I gotta see it just based on the premise alone. So I'm glad you're recommending this. All right. We'll kick it over to Greg. What's your number 3?
I'm just going to finish off that discussion and say, watch that one and not the one where Anne Hathaway falls in love with the boy band person, which is an Amazon original. But
we
don't appreciate yeah.
Which would be in Jasmine's top 3 of the year, under discussed. She's watched that movie twice.
We don't appreciate Anne Hathaway enough, but we don't have to appreciate all of Anne Hathaway.
I don't know. People are using the idea of you as the like Anne Hathaway's on a roll, like because I think people, even though they feel like the movie's kind of cheesy, really like her in it. That's sort of the word on the street, critic wise. So I don't know, but yeah, it didn't sound just the premise alone. I was like, what? Like, anyway. All right, Greg, what's your number 3?
All right. So I already shouted this out before we hit record, but I wanted to say, per the rules, I could have included Challengers or I Saw the TV Glow. I'm still angrily talking back to my AirPods at Jen being down on I Saw the TV Glow, which is a masterpiece and people should see it. But
I wasn't down on that movie.
You were so down on that movie.
Rewind the tape.
It still hurts me.
Transcript.
But I chose to, in the spirit of the night, try to pick 3 things that I think people hadn't seen. So third on my list, I believe, has been mentioned on this podcast because Jen saw it a very long time ago at a festival, but it is Sometimes I Think About Dying, starring Daisy Ridley, which was released in theaters, I believe it was in March, in a kind of small release, and it now is on VOD. It, for a while, was on the Apple TV line that was like under $10, and I think now has arrived on at least Canopy sign up at your local library. You should be Canopy members if you're not. And this is just a fantastic, small, quiet little movie. Obviously I've shared my Star Wars bona fides before, but this is just a totally different performance out of Daisy Ridley. And it does this kind of really quiet, quirky workplace thing that is reminiscent of particularly British Office, I would say, and a little bit of early Parks and Rec, perhaps. And so it does this really nicely and keeps it kind of small scale for the whole length of the movie. And it's just very sweet. And it's, as maybe is going to be a theme tonight, it comes in, I think, just under 90 minutes and is just a good time. And you leave satisfied, or at least I left satisfied as a part of it. And it features a supporting role by Megan Stalter, who I think is becoming a low-key favorite of mine in the comedy world. She's on Hacks. She plays the assistant Kayla. Yeah, and she's popping up in a lot of little indie movies lately, and is just always there to throw in a few lines and steal some laughs. So this one is high on my recommendations list, but not that high because it's number 3.
I really enjoyed this one because it really captures being an introvert better than any movie I've ever seen. And like your comparison to The Office is an apt one, but it's like, for me, it's like The Office, but with clinically defined social anxiety. Like, yeah. And to me, that was the most astounding thing about her performance, was she just captured that and it was so authentic, and it wasn't over the top. It wasn't caricature. She wasn't doing a bit, which I can see in another actor's hands could easily have happened with that movie. But yeah, I think I saw this at was this Sundance last year? Right. This is the one I was talking about earlier, right? Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember being like, wait, that still hadn't come out yet. Because I saw it 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was Sundance early 2023 is when it was at the festival.
Right. So not this most recent Sundance, but the one before that. Yeah, I co-sign this.
I this is one of the ones I had right on my list of like, I got to try to get to these. Not because I didn't plan to put it on my list, but I was assuming based on awareness of people's Letterboxd reviews and also just conversations, this would come up, but I did not get to it. I will just note, in addition to co-signing Greg's sign up for Canopy via your local library, you can also see this on Mubi. This showed up on Mubi in the last week or so. So nice. It's there as well if you can't access Canopy, if you hate libraries, and if go watch this movie on Mubi and then rethink your library views.
PT, I think it's you. What's your number 3?
Oh, is it me? Oh, wow. Okay, I'm gonna go because I feel like I've been falling behind on the main episodes when it comes to animated movies, and I also mentioned in one of the Oscar Fairy episodes that I still have never seen Frozen. So there's some talk out there that maybe I'm not committed to the form of animation. So I'm going to go with an animated movie that I only watched recently, but it really worked for me. It's called Orion and the Dark. It is a Netflix movie that is, it's a young adult movie. It's aimed at kids. The main character is an 11-year-old, but it's written by Charlie Kaufman, who wrote Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, Synecdoche, New York, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And it has all of it's all about this kid who's full of anxiety and has all these existential fears. And he befriends the anthropomorphic character of Dark, who he is, of course, terrified of, and then goes on this adventure. But because it's Charlie Kaufman, there's also this layering of narratives that happen across different times in this child's life. And, it's not like, no, this is secretly some epic masterpiece that everyone should watch. But I think that anyone who has any interest, can still have that fun with a young adult aimed film, and or really likes that style of Charlie Kaufman writing can really enjoy this. It's from, I think, the same studio. Yeah, DreamWorks Animation. So it's all very Trolls looking, like it's humans and then anthropomorphic concepts. And it has that troll style of animation, which I think is kind of take or leave in terms of the visual artistic qualities of it. But I mean, a killer cast. The Orion, the main kid, is Jacob Tremblay when he's a child. Paul Walter Hauser is Dark. Some of his anthropomorphic friends are Angela Bassett, Ike Barinholtz, who's in a bunch of comedies. He's in The After Party. He was in Blockers. Nat Faxon, who co-wrote The Descendants, the George Clooney, Alexander Payne movie, and Natasha Demetriou, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is the from What We Do in the Shadows. She's the woman vampire on What We Do in the Shadows. And it's just, I think it's just really fun. I had a really great time with it. And it's this like one of those things where there's always seems to be a bunch of sludge that gets pumped onto Netflix every week. And it got lost in the shuffle for me where I never even like was aware this existed. But I had a really good time with it. I thought it was delightful, and I was moved. I am very prone to liking Charlie Kaufman movies, so maybe that's part of it. But I really like this. This worked for me.
Well
Anyone
played.
else see this?
I didn't even know this existed. Which I'm confused by, because normally I'm on top of the animated movies.
Well, maybe so. You need to get your support behind the animation field, Jen. Maybe you need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kidding.
Well, and PT, you are the only one, I think, who has an animated movie in their hype draft. So the reputation you have as a bitter hater of animation that probably started with me last episode is unwarranted, and somebody's out of line. We're all looking for who's responsible. I'll just say I had a very funny thing with this movie. I watched it with my son. It was on the Letterboxd most popular list, and I like halfway through was like, I'd been kind of, as I'm sure the other parents on the call do, it's like, you assume it's fine, but not really that interesting. And like halfway through, I was like, oh, this is doing really cool things. And I got really invested in it. There are a couple really funny gags that have made me chuckle as I've remembered them. There's one about when you stay up late at night and you have all those thoughts running through your head, and the little anthropomorphic character is like, I know, I'll do that failed conversation from 6th grade again. That'll get him, or something. Essentially that. And I like think of that every night at 3 a.m. when I can't fall back asleep. But it was only after I watched it that I know it was Charlie Kaufman and kind of saw that connection that you're talking about. But yeah, it's really worth your time. My kid liked it. He said, he's 8, about to be 9, and he said he enjoyed it, but hasn't returned to it, which means it's kind of middling probably for him. But I don't think it's too scary or anything.
Yeah, as the childless one here, I was wondering, I was like, would a kid like this? Or is some of the Charlie Kaufman flourishes that occur like pretty fundamentally in the story structure, would that lead them to be like, oh, I guess, I don't know if I like it provides off ramps, I think, every time there's some kind of weird narrative meta folding over of itself that I think would give a kid an opportunity to be like, I'm good, I saw this. And so that is my note of caution, but I'm assuming it's mostly adults listening to the podcast, and you all could check this out. If this is something that sounds remotely appealing, I think you may enjoy it.
So Jen, how about you?
So my number 3 is, and I said this before we started recording, but I'll repeat it for the sake of the listeners. This task with the rule of you can't use a movie you've talked about already is difficult, because this podcast is basically like a book club for me, where I'm like, okay, we're talking about this week, I gotta go see it. And so, and I'm on every episode, I don't miss any. And so that means that all the movies I've seen are all the ones we've already talked about. So I had to really get creative with this a little bit. And so I am going with a movie that I saw at Sundance. I think it was also 2 years ago, the 2023 Sundance, but is only just coming out in theaters now. And that is a movie called Fancy Dance, which is starring Lily Gladstone, and she plays, I think it's her younger sister, or it might be her niece. Actually, I think it's her niece. They live on a Native American reservation, and they're really kind of there's this powwow at the end of the year that they always traditionally go participate in, and they build these elaborate beaded costumes and stuff like that. But there's a complication because the niece's parents recently passed away. Lily Gladstone's character is kind of the caregiver, but she's running into lots of problems doing that, and so it's kind of like a custody sort of, not thriller, that's probably overstating the tension that's in it, but and it's a really powerful movie, and I think a really good, like, film representing Indigenous people's perspectives. It's a great Lily Gladstone performance, and a really, really different performance than Killers of the Flower Moon. So if you liked her in Killers of the Flower Moon, she's not just doing that again in this movie, right? It's a very, very different character, but she's still bringing it. And so I think this was definitely, it was a movie I had almost forgotten about because it took so long to come out that no one talked about it forever. And I really liked it, but there wasn't a lot of buzz around it. And I think it's going to be on Apple TV because I think Apple bought it. I'm assuming they were like, we're all in on Lily Gladstone now. And so maybe they were holding it until after Killers of the Flower Moon because they knew more people would want to see it probably. But yeah, has anyone else seen this movie?
I have not seen it, but I will say, Jen, your recommendation is very timely. It's on Apple TV this Friday as people are listening to this episode. So well done. It's coming out fresh. I hadn't heard of this, and you made your endorsement means a lot because we make you see everything. So yeah, I'll check this out.
I have been hearing about this, that it was coming out in theaters and that folks were really enjoying it. I did not know it had been a Sundance. This is because we weren't podcasting back when we during that Sundance. So you probably told me about it, but we didn't record it. So how could I remember? I will just say once again, Shea Wiggum, returning champion, is also in this movie. So,
that's right.
What he's just out there. He's just out there making it happen. 2 for 2, or 2 for 4 in this.
He does play a very curmudgeonly character. He's great. Yeah. Yeah. So
I want to see Shea Wiggum play like as a bright, optimistic character someday. Just how everything's great in his life.
He's just found his lane. He's found his lane, and he knows what people want from him. Like, we support it. All right, so we're back to Antonio. What's your number 2?
So my number 2 is Tuesday. This is the movie that the Jen reference that I quoted from at the beginning. A friend of mine sent me the trailer for this like months ago, actually. And he said, oh, this made me cry. It's going to make you cry. So then I watched the trailer, and I was like, oh yeah, this is. So the premise, it's about a woman and her terminally ill daughter, and who is visited by death, who comes in the form of a parrot. And during our hype draft, PT pinned this. He was like, is this an Antonio movie? Everything except the parrot seems like Antonio. But yeah, PT was right? It came to theaters just last week. And I figured, and I needed something that I knew would just be like for me for this episode. And so I thought like, oh, they're probably not going to watch this one. The box office hasn't been robust, I think, because the theater that was playing it this past Saturday reduced it to like one showing, and it was like 12:20. So 12:20 p.m. So let me start with the reason why I think a lot of people maybe don't want to watch this movie, and it's maybe the parrot. The trailer in particular makes you wonder how successfully this is going to get pulled off. It's kind of strange. The voice is like this thunderous, almost sort of Shakespearean voice. And if you view some of the scenes, the trailer on a screen that's really small, it can look sort of on the edge of ridiculous. But I will say that on the big screen, given actual like time and scenes, the parrot becomes a full-fledged and sympathetic character and not just like a device. And I was really astounded by the quality of the visual effects here. And I did a little bit of research, and I saw some like clips of like an actual person manifesting, like Andy Serkis, like, right? And doing the movements. And that made a lot of sense because of how human the parrot sort of comes across in a lot of these scenes. So the second reason that a lot of people don't want to watch this probably is just the premise, the very sad premise. A mother struggling to figure out how to say goodbye to her dying daughter. I remembered my first creative writing class in high school. My teacher had a few rules, and one of them was like, no dead kids. She was like, it was just too cheap a method at getting to emotional impact, and the chances that we do it well were really slim. But the writer and the director here do it really well. And the line that got me was when Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character looks at her daughter and says, I love you so much more than me. And her voice is breaking, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. When I showed Janine this trailer, I knew she wouldn't want to watch it because it would make her sad. But it was actually the parrot that made her realize that she was like, okay,
I don't know. I'm more interested because there's a parrot now.
Yeah, like, okay, good. But Janine, it was like, I'll take the boys to Inside Out too. But as I was watching this, I was thinking, like, part of what makes movies like magical, especially in the theater, is that when the lights darken, you're sort of given permission to be in the movie, but to also let the movie be in you. So when you watch like Deborah Winger, pass in terms of endearment, you're crying for that character, but you're also crying for like your aunt or your grandmother or your friend. And a fictional character on a screen gives you a platform and permission to sort of unleash everything that polite society teaches you to keep in. And that's a really beautiful thing. Some art takes us to like far-flung places we've never been before. Like Dune 2 is my favorite movie of the year, partly because of that reason. But some art, even art involving a magical parrot, can take us into sort of the deepest wells of our own pain and sorrow and give us some measure of perspective and relief. And this movie, it's not a perfect movie. It doesn't execute on every level. Like another movie that I wasn't on the review on, but Hitman, I thought was just like every single like part of that, casting, writing, whatever. It's great. It's but this movie is so strange and unique and has a lot of things worth saying. And I felt like a little bit wiser after watching the movie. It was surprising in a lot of ways and did more than I thought it was going to do with its premise. So I know it's a hard sell, but hopefully that will spur some people to watch it.
Well said. Eat your heart out, Nicole Kidman. That was AMC needs to hire Antonio to do their next ad. Like, that was great.
We come here for dead kids.
That's not what I meant. All right. I want to see this movie now.
I also want to see the movie. Antonio just sold me really hard because I saw that trailer and I was like, ugh. And for me, it was the kid. It was the child dying and like the agony of that. The parrot seemed interesting, but I don't know. But hearing it all, it does work. It all comes together. Was very good. And you could replace Nicole Kidman, and probably at a lower salary.
If people can watch Pan's Labyrinth and be all excited about it, I feel like there's a double standard if they don't go watch this movie based on what you've just said. I don't know if I would have said that based on my prior knowledge of the movie.
I really had not heard anything about Tuesday. There was in my theater, like everything avoided Inside Out 2, but then these little like 3 indie movies popped up this week. Tuesday, Ghost Light, and then Treasure, which is Stephen Fry and Lena Dunham in a movie. And I was like, what are all these movies? I don't know about any of these. And so I was most interested in Tuesday, and Antonio sold me. I think just shout out to Julia Louis-Dreyfus doing these awesome indie movies. I just saw You Hurt My Feelings finally, and she just blew me away. That was so good. And just a really great time at the movies. Well, I don't really mean that, but it was a really good movie. It was, it's cringy and awkward and terrible, but also really, really well done. So I'm going to say my number 2. I want to give a shout out to the Brattle Theater here. It's in Harvard Square. It is their tagline is Boston's unofficial film school since blah, 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 some year. And they are doing a recent hits kind of programming for 2 weeks right now. And they put together a double bill of of the lesbian crime movies from this year. So it inspired me to return to and think about these movies again. So I had seen a trailer for Drive Away Dolls in the fall, and I was totally sold by that trailer. I was like, Coen brothers, lesbians, crime, zaniness, kind of more in the Hudsucker register of Coen brothers than, the Fargo register. And that movie just kind of fell apart. Sorry to say, it kind of fizzled, and it didn't. The fact it got delayed from October to February should have told me all I needed to know. But I still went in opening night. They gave me a giant poster at AMC, even though I was like the only guy there. But I was all excited, and it didn't fall apart. But then, basically a week later, the number 2 pick that I'm going with, which should be no surprise because I've tried to sneak this into every episode of the last couple months, is Love Lies Bleeding, which is so good. And so people unfamiliar with Love Lies Bleeding, this takes place in the world of 90s bodybuilding, and it stars Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien, who is sneakily becoming a pretty big movie star. Why do you ask? Well, she was on The Mandalorian, some little Star Wars things, but more importantly, she's in next month's hit film Twisters with an S, co-starring alongside Glenn Powell and all the greatest stars of today. But she, this role was not written for her. They discovered her in the audition process, but it is perfect for her. She has a, kind of stunning, but also kind of unusual body type that she could play this like bodybuilder character really well. And I don't want to get too far into spoilers, but essentially, it becomes a revenge crime plot with like some body horror mixed in. If you wish She-Hulk had been actually like body horror, like scary, then this is the movie for you. She's not green, but it's very much like that kind of Hulk energy of kind of maybe Lou Ferrigno times. Ferrigno, yes. So I will just it's really fun. It is a dark kind of comedy. It is much more Coen brothers than Drive Away Dolls was in its tone. It features Ed Harris in a great performance where he looks absolutely insane. He's bald but also has a mullet. It's just iconic, and it goes places you don't really expect in really wonderful ways. So if you haven't checked out Love Lies Bleeding, I don't believe it's on streaming yet, but it has been kind of churning away on video on demand or home video, however you want to say it, whatever year you're currently living in, and is I think doing really good business because it's a lot of fun.
Has the Laserdisc come out yet? Have they put that on the shelves?
Hey, if this replaces all the normies jokes, I'm okay with it. If this is the new thing you make fun of me for.
Oh, I really like that you think it would replace it and not just exist alongside it. I have not seen this, despite Greg doing nothing but promote it since he saw it a couple months ago. I feel terrible. It's awful. I've been meaning to be like, well, maybe I'll just rent it. It's only like $6 now because it's on VOD. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, it's an A24 movie, so it's going to be on Max eventually for free, quote unquote, the sunk cost of paying for Max. But I am very much looking forward to it. And I'll also say it's a great Elton John song, "Love Lies Bleeding." It's maybe my favorite, so I'll give it that as props.
PT, what's your number 2?
For my number 2 pick, Jen, I'm going to take a movie we already talked about on this podcast back in the Sundance Day. But because we only sort of had the film festival thing, I still want to address it, especially because it's out in theaters now. It is a movie called Thelma. It's a story about a 93-year-old grandmother who gets scammed by one of the seemingly ever-present phone scams that exist nowadays. Someone calls her with a voice that sounds enough like her 20-something grandson that they scare her into running to her bank, taking out money, and throwing it into the mail before she realizes it's not really him. And she decides, after finding out she's been scammed, she's going to go and get this money back. And it's filmed, or at least presented, as if it is a big revenge thriller action movie, but it is a 93-year-old woman played by 93-year-old June Squibb. And so nothing happens that is outside of her abilities or scope. Everything is done at the speed and pace and capacity of a 93-year-old, which it's not mocking them for being old, but it's doing a really good job of doing all these action beats that we're used to. But instead of like, I'm hacking into the mainframe, she's trying to navigate all the pop-up windows when she goes to a website. And so she's like, oh, what is this? I got to close this. And it's very funny. Her partner in crime, or at least partner in revenge, is played by the late Richard Roundtree, the original Shaft. And her, I believe it's her daughter it's her daughter and son-in-law, not her son and daughter-in-law, but they are played by Parker Posey and Clark Gregg in excellent supporting roles. And, it mixes in this sort of gentle mocking of the action film tropes with, it felt really heartfelt, sort of examinations of what it feels like to be old, to feel a little bit like, oh, we're here at the end. My time has passed. I've lost a lot of people in my life. We don't have a lot of say in what goes on around us. And these two characters kind of, saying, I'm making a choice to try to reclaim some agency in a situation where, in a stage in their life, I should say, where they don't usually have that. And so, it was remarkably poignant at times, while also being funny. It's not, again, similar to Orion in the Dark. It's not like this is peak cinema, but it's the kind of movie where it's just like, this is just a really heartwarming experience that I enjoyed, and I've thought about it a lot more than quote unquote better movies that I've watched in the last 6 months. How about you all?
So
Anyone else?
The news that I heard about this recently was that Tom Cruise gave his blessing to this movie.
Nice.
How much of that is like a PR ploy that they're feeding that in the press cycle when this movie's coming out in theaters? I'm not sure, but I thought it was really cute. I'm like, oh, that's amazing that he did that. Because they do, don't they? Well,
I don't think it counts as a spoiler.
It is, yeah, that's why I'm hesitating.
Yeah, I don't think it does, because it's so early in the movie. She's watching with her grandson before the scam happens, Mission Impossible Fallout. And they talk a little bit about like, oh, look all these things he's doing. He does his own stunts, and all of that. And so she is inspired by Tom Cruise's performance as a quote unquote old actor who's 40 years younger than her in that movie. So that's great that he was PRing for it.
I remember being quite surprised at like how touching this movie was at its center, because I think it's being marketed as a comedy, as it should be, but it really does have a lot to say about aging. And I think, to go back to your point about it's not making fun of old people, I think if it's making fun of anyone, it's making fun of the not old people for how we infantilize old people. Yes. When they really can be action stars in their own lives, right? And that's why I think the Clark Gregg and the Parker Posey characters are so good, because they're just so ridiculously awful in terms of like how they're treating the Thelma character. Has anyone else seen this movie?
I haven't seen it yet. I want to see it. I will say that at 12:20, when I was watching Tuesday by myself in the theater, and then Janine and the kids, there weren't many people. The kids weren't out yet to watch Inside Out 2 that early. But the biggest crowd was for Thelma. It was these sort of like older people, and they were talking about it, and they were like, "This is a movie for us. We're here to watch it." And they were just joking about it outside before they walked in. So I was like, if I wasn't going to Tuesday, I'd probably be going to Thelma. So it's on my list. I will watch that. I love June Squibb and Parker Posey.
I have a ticket for tomorrow night, so I'm definitely seeing this before Kinds of Kindness takes over those indie screens. And I'm a big fan of June Squibb. Would never call her Jane Squibb, no matter what you heard last week on this very podcast. And PT, I'm sorry, can you say again who is her co-star?
Richard Roundtree.
Shut your mouth.
I'm just talking about Shaft.
There it is. I didn't want to interrupt you when you were really doing it, but I thought we had to get one of those in, even if Jen just puts it after the credits.
I was. Oh, that's a good idea. I was really bracing myself. I'm like, where is this going? Like, what's going on?
I just assumed I mispronounced his name. I was like, oh no,
Right.
what have I done? I'm sowing everything I've reaped earlier this episode.
I was really starting to get concerned. I did not enough apparently to correct him while we were recording, but like Greg messed up enough names during our last recording where I was like, is he okay? Like,
is he having a stroke?
Is he? Yeah, I was like, did he not get enough sleep? Like, which I'm like, that would be a class A Greg move, but like, it was like enough. It was, and you were very consistent. You never called. I think only maybe once you called her June. Or no. This is what happened, rough. And I'm probably not including this in this episode. But I called her June Squibb to kind of like hoping that you would notice, and then you called her Jane again. It's like I don't know what to do now.
Well, I passed on because I have to do fantasy names on the Wheel of Time podcast, and I mess them up every week. So I passed it on to that co-host, and I was like, just so you know, like they had to put a disclaimer on my last episode. The other one. Lord and Miller, I just merged in Mitchell's versus the Machine, right?
Yeah,
and said Lord and Mitchell.
Yes.
So that's the reasoning, but I was wrong on all those. So, but yeah.
But you said it with such confidence that I was like, I can't stop him. It's fine. All right, it's my turn. It's my turn again. So, my film is one that I'm so happy I took the time to watch. It is called Hundreds of Beavers. That's right. It's called Hundreds of Beavers. And there are, in fact, hundreds of beavers in it. So this is a movie that I had heard a lot of good things about, but the premise was it was always qualified with, but it's kind of nuts. Like but in a way that like the real ones will understand. And they're like, it's about this fur trapper who is trying to survive in the wilderness and encounters all sorts of creatures, and in particular these beavers become his nemesis. And the movie is really about his quest for his own survival, but also his learning how to be a fur trapper and stuff like that. And the thing I haven't mentioned that makes this really weird is that it is shot in black and white as if it is a silent movie from like the 1930s and a Looney Tunes cartoon. So basically like lots of things that are classic moves in a like Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd cartoon, they are filming in live action. And the way that they recreate those moments, which I'm not going to spoil, like I'm not going to give an example because I don't want to spoil it. But like if you know Looney Tunes, there's some absurd things that happen, and and things that you think can only be shown in animation, but they somehow managed to find a way to film it in live action, and it's just really funny. It's definitely not for kids. So if you're like beavers, great, my kids will be into this. The humor is very slapstick, but it's also sort of it dips into the South Park bucket a few times, I would say. I don't know if I know PT's seen this. I don't know if you agree.
I do. I mean, there's a lot of poop jokes, animal poop. There's some moments of sexuality that are included. I would say it's a very kind of like strict line PG-13. Like a teenager may really like this. When it started, I was like, oh, this could be something. I'm thinking of my friends with kids single digit aged. And then as it was going on, I was like, no, this is not. The parents can watch this because they're in their 40s and they laugh at poop jokes too. But the rest of it maybe not. I love this movie. I'm very glad that you are bringing it up, Jen. I'm glad that you got to watch this as well. Because I was like, I'd heard about this. People were saying, "Oh, it's fine, it's good." Like it's really weird, but it's a good time. I got like 10 minutes in, and I was like, I think I get it. Like, I think this is fine. But it be like the best sort of slapstick movies and like the best kind of Looney Tunes cartoons. There are these things that you don't even know are jokes happening beneath the jokes that are just starting to build all these pieces that start paying off in the final third of the movie. And like, it's such a fun romp. It has this love for film history because it's using the aesthetic of like an old silent movie and some of the sort of frame rates, some of the film speed of that. And even though it does kind of have like compositioning of different elements, there's some things that I think are probably done on a computer. There's some things that are very handmade. I don't want to identify any of those necessarily. People should just watch it without knowing too much more than what we're saying here. But it's great. I'll also just note, and this is where I started thinking, oh, maybe it could be good for kids, but certainly teenagers and adults who are into this. It's very much set up like a video game, or at least it has all these video game elements to it, where it's like, oh, it's this character learning things, gathering gathering currency, gathering resources in order to learn what he needs to do in order to survive. So this is a movie Jasmine very quickly left. I mean, I started it later at night, but she got like 5 minutes and she was like, "Who said this movie was good?" And it's hard to be like, well, Sean Fennessy, because she doesn't care about that. But I'm just like, well, I just heard it was pretty good. She's like, okay, well, good night. And that was the extent of her review of it. But it was really fun, and I was cackling. And it's a very unique thing that I don't think you're going to be able to get another movie like this. So I think of all of these, this is the one that is, of the ones I've seen, stands out as the most sort of weird thing in a good way.
So I pitched several movies, including many we've mentioned during this episode to John the other night, to be like, okay, here are things I need to watch for the podcast. If any of these seem interesting, we can watch them together. And I described Hundreds of Beavers, and he was like, what? And then he was like, well, he's like, that seems like something that's either gonna be terrible or incredible. And so out of curiosity, he was like, and then we cackled the whole time. And there's one particular bit with a group of raccoons that I lost my mind. I almost woke my children up. It's like, because I was laughing so hard, and he was like, you need to calm down. Like, PT and I can confer later to confirm which part it was. But I would also just give a shout out to the production design on this is incredible. There's lots of costumes and sort of like creature work. This is maybe the best. It's almost Henson-esque in some places, like and it just all really works, and it's so funny. Like it adds to the humor. I'm glad you brought up video games, because that was going to be my other thing. Is like it does follow the narrative structure of a video game, which at first you're like, wait, how long is this movie? How is this 2 hours?
Yes.
But then it kind of makes sense why, because I think it's part of the artistic and intellectual project that it's taking on. This movie is wild if you haven't seen it.
In a just world, this gets a production design and a costume design nominations. I will just also note,
sound, because there's actually lots of video game references in the sound work.
Yes, there's a whistle that I'm just thinking of it makes me laugh. I will also just note, this is continuing our push to get people to use streaming services available via their local libraries. This is in addition to being rentable on demand. You can also watch it through Hoopla, which is another library-based service, and that's how I got it. I borrowed it from the Los Angeles Library through Hoopla, and it's a really good time. I recommend it as well. Cosign.
This toured essentially, right? Its theatrical run kind of February, March was I know it came to town for like 2 weeks. I don't think like the creator was introducing it or anything, but it got like held over was the language used because it moved on to other cities. So they're doing something very cool.
Yeah, I believe so. Because this, I mean, on Wikipedia and Letterboxd, this is listed as a 2022 movie. Like it hit festivals, I think, for a little while, and it's one of those things where it feels like a lot of people went to go see it, and we're like, "Wow, we had a really good time. But we can't sell this to anybody, but we had a nice time. Like we enjoyed it." And so I think they took it out on their own. They sort of roadshowed it a little bit. Earlier this year, and now it's out on demand. I do that. My only regret is I think seeing this in a theater with a bunch of other people would have been incredible.
All right, we're back to Antonio, who I assume is going to pick something very different than Hundreds of Beavers. Just my guess.
The sequel, Thousands of Beavers, just came out.
So I'm going to pick something that you all reviewed, but I wasn't there for. So my number one is Greg's already mentioned it. I saw the TV Glow, and I wouldn't have watched it if not for you all and for listening to your review of it. So in my first semester of college in 1999, I remember watching Guy Ritchie's Snatch with one of my best friends from college. And I remember being like a half hour into the movie, my friend and I were having trouble understanding what Brad Pitt was saying and what was going on in the movie. And I looked at her and I said, "This movie is hard." and it was Friday night and we both just wanted something fun. So we just turned it off and we put on Best in Show and we had a really good time. So this preface isn't to say that like all movies that demand more of us are not worth our time, but we've all been in situations where we're like reading a book or watching a TV show or in a play, and it's making us work really hard to figure it out. And you're getting about halfway through and you're like, this isn't going to be worth it. It's not going to be worth my time. All of this is to say that I Saw the TV Glow is strange and complex and not necessarily an easy read, but I think is beyond worth the effort. And contains more propulsive pleasures than Snatch. So the premise, I mean, again, there's already been a review about it, so I'm not going to talk too much, but like it's about two outcast teenagers in the 90s who connect over a sort of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer type TV show. But movies like this are the reason why I like having you all and like cinephile friends like you all, because, you know, after watching it and while you're watching it, there's just so much that's ripe for discussion. And you just want really smart people to help you unpack it and to take, you know, apart different parts of it and to help you make sense of it. And it's just that rich a text. So I just love listening to you, Jen and PT, ponder this movie. And then when I finally watched it, I finally understood your enthusiasm. The first line of my Letterboxd review was, "I don't know that I've ever seen a movie that expresses feeling alienated from the world as achingly or artfully as this film." And like years from now, there, you know, details of plots might escape me, and this one included, but there are certain images that will stick in my head and a feeling I had upon watching it that mirrors the feeling that the characters had when they watched this 90s TV show that left me like stunned and as confused as like a teenager, like first discovering love. And it will just be with me for a really long time. So thank you for your review and your recommendation, because I wouldn't have seen this in the theater if it hadn't been for you. And I'm really glad that I did.
Yay. And I liked this movie. I just was relatively more critical of it than PT. So I stand by that I like this pick. Don't assume I don't like this pick. You've listened to that.
That's ironic in some ways, because all the movies you watch at home are handed to you from PT on home video, right? He records them off TV and hands you a video cassette. I leave
them in the copy room at our department, so she can pick them up. And I've drawn little
knowing that I never check my mailbox there.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say, Antonio, I'm really glad that you went to go see this, and feels pretty good to have this in my hype draft roster. I feel great about it because this movie is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So I'm so far behind in my podcast queue. I just hit a big deposit of films or a podcast talking about this movie, and it really made me revisit like my feelings. And I realized that I had like this magical, wonderful experience with it, and I really never want to revisit it. And that to me is like this rare magical experience movies give me sometime. It's like, it's a great film. It really, was powerful to me. I've thought about it countless times, but I'm like, I almost don't want to let it become something else in my mind. Well, it mirrors how when he's an adult and he streams the Pinko Peg, and it seems terrible compared to how he remembers it. And I think I want to let this one kind of live in my memory of that quality. But just Antonio was already so eloquent about, but I will just say there's something about the particular brand of nostalgia that it gave me where you kind of have this deep yearning that you want what you experience to be meaningful. And like so much of what we experience just isn't. And that's the nature of life. But the fact that like something can pull at my, like, I did watch The Adventures of Pete and Pete for hours and hours and hours, and it meant something, or it helps me understand something about myself or the world. It was really powerful. I drank Fruitopia. I remember that vending machine. Whatever I sat under a parachute. I hadn't thought about being under one of those parachutes in gym class for 20 years bare minimum, and it just was like powerful. So absolutely, I wish I'd been on that episode to talk about it, because it is one that's so good to chew on.
Yeah.
If we had stuck with the plan of we're just going to list our 3 movies and then it would have been a lot of overlap, this would have been third after the 2 blockbusters, that Dune and Furiosa, for me.
All right, we're back to Greg. I have an idea of what his pick is going to be.
I, of course, and they're all laughing because my Zoom name gives me away. But I am picking Civil War, which I'm just gonna say off the bat, absolutely blew me away. I think in the kind of behind the scenes on this podcast, we joked a lot about we were struggling with, should we review this, should we not? And I think a lot of us in our kind of turmoil about the election year and politics in general, we're like, let's sit this one out. But then I went and saw Ex Machina, and they played the first 5 minutes of Civil War after it. And I was like, oh, I really need to see this. And I thought Civil War was incredible. I realize I'm going big A24 bro energy on this podcast, but I'm here for it. I'll embrace who I am. And this is a really kind of incredibly put together movie that I think most people misunderstood. The Monday after it came out, A24 was bragging about how they got like blue staters to come see it because we all thought it was making fun of red staters, and it got red state like men, especially who are like doomsday preppers, to come out because they thought they were going to live their fantasy. And A24 was like, we did it. We brought everybody together. And I was like, you should talk to your social media team, because like that just totally misunderstands like what's brilliant about this movie. And so to me, I will just say, trying to remain fairly spoiler free, to me, this movie is about cognitive dissonance and how when there's something as difficult as war or kind of the big things in our lives, we have trouble capturing that and understanding what that is. And there's always going to be this gap between the lived experience of those events and the way it is represented. And this is much more a film about media and representation than it is about politics. I think it eventually got pretty clearly demarked in the critical discourse that, this was, they kind of fake all the politics because they really don't want to wade into all of this stuff. And so it's this bizarre alignment of states that makes no sense. And I think to me, that just signals like, okay, so it's not about that, right? It's about something else. And I think the much focused upon Jesse Plemons scene from the trailer also kind of doesn't quite represent what the film is about, even though he's incredible and it's an incredible scene. I think it's probably Kirsten Dunst's best performance, or maybe I should say my favorite performance of hers. I understand The Year of the Dog and what, right? I had that title right. Now I'm
Power
paraphrasing
of
names.
the Power of the Dog.
Power of the Dog. There it is. Power of the Dog. The Year of Power of the Dog. That's what I was trying to say. But I understand that she was really great in that. I'm not diminishing that, but that was one that felt like it participated in kind of hysteric woman discourse in a way I didn't really like, and maybe that's unfair. But this was something really powerful and different, and the kind of part I think so many actresses don't get in their career because of, a million terrible Hollywood reasons. I liked Priscilla, but this unlocked Kaylee Spaney for me, and really made me realize, because it was this her starring with Kirsten Dunst that got her recommended to Sofia Coppola for Priscilla, and it just she's really excellent in it, and it's just a really big different movie. I'm encouraged by the fact it made a lot of money for the scale of what it was, and then it has stayed pretty far at the top of like the iTunes bestseller. So I think maybe I know I believe Antonio's seen it, but I believe people not on the Zoom call, actually a lot of people have seen it, but if it somehow made it into the overlooked pile for some of our listeners, it's definitely worth checking out. I have not watched it at home yet, but I did pre-order the 4K because I think it's one I want to revisit a couple more times.
Wow. That alone is a pretty big endorsement.
I agree with Greg. If he hadn't said it, I would have said it is Kirsten Dunst's best performance, and I really did love her. And up until that point, I thought Power of the Dog, there wasn't going to be a better performance for her than that, but this was it. And I also agree that I was late to watch this movie, partially because of the focus on all the wrong things about the movie that led me to think, that led me to believe what it was going to be, or that made me fear what it was going to be. But I was pleasantly surprised with its narrative focus, and it was just like this just relentless journey with these really well-drawn central characters, and it was really exciting to watch, and just performed really well. So I'm glad that you got your opportunity to shout this one out and that we could talk about it for a minute.
PT, have they convinced you to see this movie? Because you were the one who was probably the most resistant. Yeah,
I was. My big reaction from the announcement was just not now, Alex. Like, just not. Like, we don't have the capacity for this. But I think Greg says it very well. In assuming he was speaking to people like me who were like hesitant to go see it, that there's the fact that these details that you hear about it don't make sense in any sort of actual current geopolitical context are the point, that's like intentional to try to sidestep not the sort of questions of right and wrong in the world today, but just to shift the focus to something else. And I mean, as Alex Garland does good work frequently. So I am excited to check it out. And I will publicly apologize to Greg for being probably the main obstacle for there not being a Civil War episode.
We came close.
He was like, "What about Civil War?" I was like, "No," and then I was like, "Do it without me." And then Jen was like, "Oh well, maybe I won't see it." So, but yeah, I think
for me it was more like I don't know if I could see it this week, and then we kind of lost the momentum was gone kind of after a certain point, I think. But not to make excuses.
I dragged my feet long enough that it became hard for you to do it. So I did it. I hurt Greg, and I apologize.
I do feel like this is one of those movies, and I feel like we've gotten a bunch of these this year. I'm thinking of Fall Guy also, like, suffering from its own marketing, right? Because I think Fall Guy was like, didn't know, it split the difference too much. It's like, is this an action movie? Is it a rom-com? Right? Then neither of those groups went to go see it. This seems like it had a promise of provocation that I think turned lots of people away, as we've been talking about, when in fact, if it hadn't been like, because I think my assumption from all the marketing materials was like, oh, this is going to be a dystopian sort of working out of our current issues politically, right? Which sounds like it's not. So, and I think lots of people assume that. So either people were like incensed at what they thought it was going to say, or they were afraid and didn't want to face what it was going to say, right? And then that drove people away from watching it. And then by the time people, because I do remember there's a wave of critics who were like, oh, this actually wasn't what I thought it would be. But by then it was too late. You know what I mean? I remember that being like, oh yeah, I got to go see this now. And then it was, the moment had passed. So yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it was too late for the discourse, but it seems like it wasn't too late for it to be successful, or the marketing was successful at getting people into the theater, just not you and me. Like the two of us were the kind of people who weren't able to overcome that. But I guess it worked for them. So business wise, good for them. Is it still in the top 10 of the year domestic? I think it might be.
Might be. Yeah.
That's impressive.
I'll just throw that out there. I won't check that. Don't fact check.
Isn't that going against what you're supposed to learn from the movie? Okay. Anyway, this is why you need to go see this movie, apparently.
I am fact checking it.
Right.
It's not in the top 10 anymore.
Oh, okay.
It's been passed by such failures as The Fall Guy and Bob Marley, One Love.
Oof.
I don't know.
I forgot about that too.
Hey, good for them. They made money.
We're trying to stay positive here, PT. What's your next pick?
All right. My third and final pick, again, also perhaps unsurprisingly, is Evil Does Not Exist, which was one of my hype draft picks. And so, of course, I have a vested interest in supporting it, but I also really loved it. It is the new movie by Ryosuke Hamaguchi, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing his name. He directed Drive My Car a few years ago, which is a full-on masterpiece. This movie does not get quite up to that level, but it is an excellent film. It's a story of people in a small remote Japanese village who have to deal with this Tokyo-based company coming in saying, hey, we've bought a bunch of land and we're going to make it a high-end camping site. They actually have glamping, which is, there's no Japanese word for it. So they just say glamping a lot mixed in with all the Japanese dialogue.
That's great.
And so it's not a, rough and tumble story. There's not a lot of action to it. It's very meditative. If you watch Drive My Car, you will not be that surprised by the pacing of this movie. It's very deliberate. Apparently was initially conceived as a short film, a more abstract short film, as a collaboration with the composer Aiko Ishibashi, who did the score for Drive My Car and also did the score for this. So the score is very prominent, and the score is something that both sort of lulls you in certain scenes, but then also the way it just kind of cuts in and out as the movie unfolds, kind of like it jars you in a way where it's like nothing that's happening on screen is indicating that anything like off-putting is happening, but because of the way the score is implemented, it's sort of throwing you off. And it's really about the sort of delicate balance of nature and people, and how endeavors like this will throw that off, and the people who are trying to be like, oh, what if we don't do that? What if instead we try to go a different way? And how that all unfolds. The last sequences of this movie, well, I would say there's many sequences of the movie that go off in slightly, not like crazy wild directions like Orion in the Dark or even like Thelma or Hundreds of Beavers. But there's surprising some of the choices that are made of like, oh, we're following this character now for a little while. I didn't think that was someone we cared about as much. But that really enriches the story and deepens the experience. And then the final sequences, it's one of those movies that ended and I was like, everything that happened before the end of this movie is different. Like I need to go back and immediately watch it again, which I didn't do, but I will once I have the opportunity to do so without going to a theater. It's all changed because of how it ended, which I think that's a good experience. So I strongly recommend this movie. I believe it's long gone from theaters, but if you do have an opportunity, the visuals that the director captures, as well as that experience of the score in a theater setting, is I think really elevates it. But also watch it at home if you can get it on demand as soon as you can. Did anyone else see this? Am I alone on an island?
I interestingly, ironically, the week there was a week where I had another cinema friend, and the choice was between Evil Does Not Exist or I Saw the TV Glow, and so I was going to win either way. It seems like, but that's what we went with, because I think it was just showing it at better times or just at more theaters. But I love Drive My Car. It was my favorite movie of that year, and so as soon as it comes out on demand, I will watch it.
Seemed like a very short theatrical run, because I had it on my radar and it really disappeared quickly. Which I have a theater near here that often does a lot of Asian import movies for longer. I think there's a larger international community up on the North Shore above the city that drives the business up there a little bit, and it still didn't last very long. So I'm excited to see it. I was just on my phone looking to see if it was already on demand, and it's frustratingly not on demand quite yet, but hopefully soon.
So the explanation for that might be because my internet sleuthing while everybody was talking is that it's Apple TV bought it, so they might be hoarding it. You know what I mean? So for a release, I couldn't find a date of when it's going to be on Apple TV, but that seems to be. And again, the sources I've found that said this were very not official. Like it was like a Reddit forum where a bunch of people were like, I think it got bought by Apple TV, and I wasn't able to confirm that, but that's what
when I was looking around for information in what little preparation I do, at least for this podcast, I did see it's one of the presumed front runners to be Japan's submission for international movie this year. So if it has been bought by Apple or some other streaming service, it's possible they will hold off and try to time it with an Academy Awards push later in the year. But yeah, keep your eyes out for it. It has kind of feels like it has been a little. It's flown too far under the radar. Maybe done a little bit dirty in terms of how available it's been. But hopefully, it will have its time in the snowy sun.
Oh no, I'm just seeing Vim Vendor said no, it can't be the Japan nominee this year. He's got another movie, part 2, a whole bunch of different restrooms.
More.
What is your beef with Vim Vendors? Like, what?
Wait, can Hamaguchi have this entered from Austria? Like, could that be the trade-off?
It's a swap, yeah. I actually, Perfect Days was not a bad movie whatsoever. I just find it ridiculous because it goes back to the way those get chosen, and the whole process doesn't make sense. And we already litigated this with Anatomy of a Fall as well, right? Like, get the governments out of this process. Give however many countries want to, like, however many films from each country should compete that we can. Like, I'm over this process.
That might be a good segue into my number one pick, because it is also an international feature that tragically has no hopes of getting nominated for the Oscars, and that is an Italian movie called La Chimera, which. If you're a true listener, a true believer of this podcast, and you've been paying attention way, way, way back at our previous, not this past year, but the previous hype draft, I tried to smuggle this in as one of my unofficial picks. I was torn between this and Saltburn and chose poorly. Sorry, Greg.
Unsubscribe. Sorry. Siri, unsubscribe.
Hey, not as bad as choosing Napoleon instead of Poor Things, because you didn't know Poor Things was going to come out. So look, you're fine.
We all made mistakes.
We all made mistakes.
So this is a movie that premiered. It is not eligible for the Oscars because it premiered but is eligible for this list that we're making because it premiered in the US in 2024, but had already come out in Europe. last year. And so if it had any hopes of being selected, right, it would have been last year. And so the ship has sailed, which broke my heart when I saw this because I really loved it. And I had feel bad I had put off seeing it for so long. So the premise of this movie, it's directed by Alice Rohrwacher, who is actually Italian. I looked it up despite not having a stereotypically Italian name. And it is starring Josh O'Connor, who speaks Italian for like 90% of this movie. It's an Italian movie. It's in Italian. There's subtitles for most of it. And he plays, they call him the Englishman, like he plays a British character, but he's a British character who lives in Italy and speaks Italian fluently, and does so convincingly. But the premise of it is he is an archaeologist who's gotten kind of pulled into this, crime ring of people who rob ancient graves in Italy and steal and sell on the black market Etruscan artifacts. And so I had sort of pitched it on that way back, that old Hype Draft episode. I had pitched it as like Indiana Jones, but like the harsh realities of, and the Indiana Jones comparison is not a helpful one because in terms of the style of the movie, it is nowhere near. It's not an action movie at all, but it is incredibly intoxicating in its story. And it's like, the first like 20 minutes or so are Josh O'Connor being really surly and smoking a lot of cigarettes. And so I was like, where is this going? Because you don't know why he's so surly and mean to everybody, right? And then the movie kind of the story behind what he's doing and sort of like what his baggage is as a character unfolds slowly over time. And it just really pulled me in a way I was not expecting. And it has like this sort of like feverish quality to it. It's a little bit surreal, but only like a hint. Like it's maybe like in the way that Hitman was like sprinkle in 10% academic ideas. This is like a realist indie movie, but sprinkle in 10% of like supernatural, like magical realism, possibly ? But in a way that's like stylized, like Call Me by Your Name. You know what I mean? That might be the bias because I'm just like, oh, Italy. So I don't know how much of that is like me as an American viewer being like, Italy is so romantic and mysterious and beautiful and like, but yeah, I this movie really took me by surprise in terms of how much I liked it, because I feel like it sort of like was on people's radars, but then no one talked about it afterwards. But now when people are doing, these sort of like the year so far, here's movies that are coming out now that maybe you haven't seen, like we are doing right now, it's popping up on a lot of lists. And suddenly people are talking about it. So, so this is, I'd say that this is really good if you want to learn more about the underbelly of archaeology. But then also, or if you really like Josh O'Connor, and if you enjoyed him as like making questionable life choices in Challengers, you should definitely watch this movie. Like, this is like him doubling down on his like, scuzzy, like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life sort of vibe. Yeah. Has anyone seen this movie?
I saw the trailer and it looked good, but I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, it's only on VOD, but it is neon, so I assume at some point it will be on Hulu.
Okay.
It's also pretty cheap on demand. It's only $10 to buy and $3.99 to rent. So I think you gave me something to do this week. It has it's hung out in like the mid 40s on the most popular on Letterboxd for a really long time. And it's like I'm always working my way down. I'm like, oh, here comes La Chimera. I'll get there, and then something else pops. And then I watch Unfrosted instead of this. So I gotta work through some issues on my own. So. But
I will say that I have not seen this. You pitched this is like the graveyard of well pitched podcast episodes that never happened. That is kind of what this all was about. But I remember you being like, La Chimera, you guys, like this could be really good. And it sounded good then. The pitch is even better now. I will just say, to give you a little bit of hope, I don't know if this level of Letterboxd interest means that it could get to this point. But there's some precedent. The mid-70s or early to mid-70s Francois Truffaut movie, Day for Night, was France's nominee for Best International Movie, I think Best Foreign Movie at that point, and won at the 46th Academy Awards in 1974. Then the next year, after it came out in America, it got a bunch of above the line nominations. It got director and screenplay and won supporting actress.
Let's start the campaign now.
So yeah, like just because a movie isn't eligible in the one category doesn't mean that, you know, it's still, all the other categories are tied to American release date. So yeah, start the clocks. Let's go.
All right. Also, I should mention incredible supporting performance by Isabella Rossellini.
Yeah.
Not enough to get an Oscar nomination, I don't think, just because of the nature of the role, but like she's so good. All right. Wow. We have put together a really nice list.
Nice
Pat
list.
ourselves on the back. Yeah. And so interesting trends. I just want to point out, now that I'm looking at the whole list. A24 heavily represented by all of us, not just Greg. And then also we name checked Sundance a lot. So a lot of these movies premiered at Sundance. I think more in person, and we didn't see it till later. But some of them, you know, because I saw Fancy Dance, and sometimes I think about dying digitally on the online Sundance. So yeah, Sundance apparently quietly just bringing us great movies, and as well as A24 probably, like, some cases really good at marketing, other cases not as good at marketing their movies. Yeah. Any other thoughts about, now that we're looking at our list?
I have a lot of movies to watch. I got a lot of movies to watch right now. There's just a lot happening. These are great.
Yeah. So I wanted to conclude, and we don't have to belabor this too much, but since we are a podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race, we're doing this mid-year check-in. Two kind of different things I want to talk about. One is, like, what realistically is Oscar worthy based on what you've seen so far this year? And the other slightly different question is sort of like, where are we in the Oscar race right now in terms of, like, what has buzz even this early? What are we keeping an eye out for? That kind of thing.
The only movie that I've seen that I'm confident is going to get a ton of Oscar nominations is Dune 2. I'm excited for Anora, right? For that's released, but I haven't seen it. I feel fairly confident. I've seen the previews and a lot of films that I've seen for Sing Sing, and so I feel pretty confident that Coleman Domingo is set for another nomination, maybe a win. But again, I haven't seen that yet. But I don't know. It feels like Greg sent out a text to all of us saying, like, you know, a year ago, Past Lives came out, and I remembered that in recent years there have been some, like, really early excellent movies, like Everything Everywhere All at Once came out really early as well. But this year, beyond Dune 2, in terms of, like, Oscar stuff, I don't know that there's been that I've seen a ton that I feel really confident. How about the rest of you?
I'm with you on that. I feel like that we're at the point in the year where you guys were saying earlier, the Oscar movies start to come out more in the fall, into the winter, and that's when things were really going to kick off. It doesn't seem right now. If it was the Oscars were for some reason only through June, it does feel like Dune Part 2 would be, like, marching through. It is all these unknown uncertainties that are out there. I know both Jen and I got to see A Real Pain, which is the Jesse Eisenberg directed movie starring him and Kieran Culkin. And at the time it was like, well, yeah, Kieran Culkin might get a nomination. And as time has gone on, it's like, that might get a Best Picture. He might get a Best Original Screenplay, Eisenberg for writing it. Like, that might be a movie that gets up to three, four nominations. So, you know, this may be where, you know, the feeling of, oh, it's a slow year. Is that just because we haven't had that movie that gripped us in that like obvious way that Past Lives did? Is it something that we have missed? Is it just that they're all coming out later in the year? I don't know, except that, of course, Best International Movie, Evil Does Not Exist. Best Animated Movie, Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. You heard it here first. Coming here straight from my list, my hype draft list.
Always talking about animation, that PT. So I completely agree. I think we at some point in the first half of the year said, "Wow, this will be the Furiosa versus Dune 2 Oscars." And given the kind of lackluster box office of Furiosa, I think it's just the Dune 2 year. Furiosa will probably still net a few in those below the line categories, but again, so after I saw the TV Glow deposit of podcast episodes, I'm now in the middle of all the Furiosa episodes, and it's like, wow, we're only a month out and nobody's talking about that movie anymore. It's like it barely was a blip in the cultural conversation, which I don't think is fair and I think is a shame. I support them not rushing it to VOD the way Universal did with Fall Guy, but maybe there'll be a kind of stir once it arrives, maybe August-ish it has to be headed to Max, the one to watch for HBO eventually. So maybe they'll get some there. I honestly, and this is not just because it was one of my picks tonight, but Civil War could eat a little of Furiosa's lunch in those categories, right? Like it's got a little of that overperformed. A24's marketing already got a shout out, but particularly their awards team has a very clear, proven track record of pushing things up into the nomination realm. So I can see that happening. I didn't want to go full A24 crazy, but like they also did the Steve Martin documentary, which was really good and has potential. And they did Problemista, which I don't think was entirely successful, but featured a really awesome Tilda Swinton performance. So there are all these kind of little things cooking along. The only movie I've seen lately that I thought for sure would be an Oscar contention, I'm going to call it early, even though maybe you'll laugh at me later. I think Jodie Comer is going to get nominated for Bike Riders, which I almost call Boys with the Bikes every time. Thank you, George Clooney, Boys with the Boats. But that movie is awards quality, and it hangs on her in a way at least I totally didn't expect. So I'm going to call it early. I'm thinking Jodie Comer sneaks in for a best. It would be best lead actress unless there's category flaw, because she's the primary narrator of the film.
Mm.
Well, Jodie Comer is like halfway to an EGOT, right? She's got an Emmy for Killing Eve. She won a Tony for a one woman play. So an Oscar nomination. I mean, she's amazing. So I fully believe that she's great in this. So cool. Jen, what do you think?
I think it's hard to it's easy for me to jump right into like I've absorbed all the talk about the Oscars even this early, and let me just recap what I've heard and not focus on what I've actually seen. But I was gonna bring up Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain. That really feels like the sort of like Bill Nighy Living kind of nomination, where it's like that movie doesn't show up anywhere else and people are like, what's that? By the time it's the Oscars next year. But that people really like Kieran Culkin. He crushed it at the end of Succession, right? Like, so that like and I'm actually seeing a lot of potential. The movie that we might like them in is not going to get nominated, but they could get a bump from it. So like we've talked in the past about Zendaya, like maybe Challengers doesn't get any nominations, but because of Challengers and Dune Part 2, she makes it in for one of those, right? Probably more likely Dune Part 2 at this point, as we've been saying, if it has that kind of nomination sweep in a lot of categories. Same thing I'd say with Josh O'Connor. If enough people have seen La Chimera, this is much less likely. Like, because I'm the only one who's seen it on this call, right? So that alone, I think, is indicative of this being a pipe dream. But like, if enough people saw that by this time next year, or by the Oscars next year, that could give him a Challengers bump or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like something weird like that. I do think if I'm looking at our list that we just made, a lot of these aren't in Oscar contention because of the genre factor, right? So like Thelma's too much of a action comedy, right? Love Lies Bleeding is body horror, right? Like
the June Squibb Best Actress nomination campaign has started already here on this show, and it will continue.
Let it be known.
So yeah, let it be known. I would also, having not seen most of the movies, I also currently would love Richard Roundtree in Best Supporting Actor.
That's
as
a
posthumous
Golden
nomination.
Globe. That feels like a Golden Globe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
nomination.
it does.
Yep.
Yeah.
It does. But also, she's really great, and she's
Yeah.
quite old. I don't know if you're aware of that. So it would be awesome if she got another nomination.
But
But
like,
you're
yeah,
right.
I
It's
saw
not
the TV Glow would be like a fun fringe screenplay nomination, right? Like, but nothing else probably. So yeah, so it's like a lot of the movies we've picked don't really don't fit the profile of something that would be an Oscar contender. But otherwise are great. So yeah, it's tough to say. The other things I've also heard the Jodie Comer thing. That's an actual thing that's happening. and we'll probably have an elaborate campaign for. Amy Adams apparently has a movie from A24 coming out called Night Bitch. Sorry, that's the actual title. I had no way of getting around that. That people are really excited for and say that this could be it for her, like in terms of the getting it out, getting a win. Because she's been nominated before but not won.
Yeah, she's like a low key little Glenn Close.
Yeah,
in this, like she's been waiting. It could be her turn. But then also there's Saoirse Ronan has got a couple of movies that have some potentially. I forget the one that she stars in that people are like, she's really good. The movie, I don't know. And then she could be supporting in Blitz, which is this weird like black hole of like no one knows anything about it, but everyone's like, well, this must be a big contender, right? And yeah, so I mean, who knows what happens, but that would be great for Amy Adams if she did a good job. And it wouldn't be for the Ron Howard movie from the J.D. Vance book. I forget what that was.
Hillbilly Elegy.
Hillbilly
Yes.
Elegy. Thank you. She didn't get it for that. They were.
That was Glenn
Yeah,
Close
they
too.
were.
Yeah.
They were. They tried to put the power rings together. It didn't pan out.
And all they got out of it is J.D. Vance probably being a vice presidential candidate.
Yes. We also got Glenn Close twerking at the weird Union Station COVID Oscars. Twerking and then having the award ripped out of her hands by, I think, Frances McDormand, right? So what a time. What a time to be alive.
What I was going to say is the main narrative.
You
I
can't
don't know how to
recover
respond
from
directly to any of
yeah.
that. Yeah, I don't know. The main narrative, I think, if I had to like make a bold prediction, based on what we've been talking about this episode, it feels like Dune Part 2 breaks above the line.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in any other year, right? And again, we're only halfway through the year, but like that's right now, that's what it seems like is within reach. Whereas it would not have been sort of in another year where we would have had another big movie by now. But as we said, like fall film festival season is just getting started, right? Get it in full swing. We've had a few crumbs like Sundance, South by Southwest, Cannes, right? But now once the flurry of other film festivals starts, we're going to in earnest see a lot more things. The one movie we have never spoken on this podcast that has been popping up a ton is called Conclave, which I think is about popes. Does anyone know about this movie?
It's like a Pope mystery movie, isn't it, Ray Fine?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it actually sounds kind of good.
Yeah.
Not and very different than like The Two Popes. Did anyone ever see that movie?
Yeah, I did.
I saw that one. Yeah,
I was nominated.
It was fine.
Yeah, it was fine.
You know what? I mean, possibly at least one too many popes for one movie, but.
So that's the other one during film festival season to keep an eye out for. But yeah, it's this weird in between time where there's still so much possibility left.
There's going to be at least two movies that we are not thinking about at all that suddenly are in the middle of the conversation for a while. And then the other thing that may happen is some of these movies that we're like, well, yeah, it's nice, but like whatever, you know, it's fine, but it doesn't really have a shot. If there's not like things that pop in the fall, then suddenly, Civil War could be like a 4, 5, 6 nomination movie. Like that's possible. That could definitely happen this year. So it'll be interesting to see.
All right. Well, regardless of what happens for the rest of the year, I think we've put together a really solid list of movies that people shouldn't forget about, right? And they might, kind of in the hoopla of the rest of the year. So thanks everybody for doing this. I'm really excited to see all these movies on this list that I haven't seen already. So Antonio, where can folks find you? And there's only one place.
There's only one place. It is on Letterboxd. A Elefano, AELEFANO. Greg, where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram, Letterboxd, and Threads primarily at IonCanon, EYEONCANON. PT, people might like to follow you, but where can they follow the pod most importantly?
That is more important. If they want to follow me, like Antonio, they can find me on Letterboxd. PT McNiff, PT MCNIFF. But why wouldn't you just follow the pod there instead? At LTR Pod on Letterboxd. You could also follow on Instagram or Threads at The Long Take Review. You can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. You can also subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. And if you were like, I don't understand where the sound is coming from, why don't you go to Jen's Substack, thelongtake.substack.com, and just subscribe there, because then you will also get her wonderful written reviews of all kinds of franchise content that is washing over her right now, at I'm sure an undesirably fast pace. Jen, as you attempt to tread water, where can folks find you besides that?
Yes, you can find me barely keeping up with everything at Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd, and on Instagram and Threads at Subchokchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. Yeah, it's The Acolyte, House of the Dragon, plus all these movies I gotta go see now. Like it's a lot. It's a lot, but I love it. Everybody go out and see some of these movies. Hit up that VOD, home video. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes, as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.